Good morning, everyone. This session is on tobacco taxation. Many of you were here for the last session yesterday evening. This is sort of a continuation of that session. Dr. Asma Haider Baloch, members, Social Sector, Ministry of Planning and Development, would chair this session. I request Asma to take her seat. Professor Frank Cholupka would be the guest of honor. Dr. Mahmood Khalid from PIDE would be presenting. Dr. Sabir from SPDC. Dr. Roberto Leglieses. Mr. Zahir Qureshi from FBR might be joining us and might not be joining us, but he's among the speakers. And Dr. Ziauddin from the Tobacco Cell. Just a two-line introduction to all of them. Dr. Asma Haider is member Social Sector at the Planning Commission. She's also serving as Professor of Labor Economics at the Institute of Business Administration, Karachi, and she's a research affiliate for research on labor and employment at the University of California, Los Angeles. Dr. Frank Cholupka is a research professor in the Division of Health Policy and Administration at Chicago School of Public Health, University of Illinois. Mohammad Sabir is principal economist and unit head in public finance unit at SPDC. He is visiting faculty member at the Department of Commerce, University of Karachi. Dr. Mahmood Khalid is currently serving as senior research economist at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics, PIDE. And Dr. Ziauddin is a public health specialist, and he's director and technical head, Tobacco Control Cell, for over a decade now, and his area of specialization is health economics. Before we get to the serious stuff, there is a 2-minute video that pretty much summarizes everything related to tobacco taxation. Once the video is over, the chair would take over the proceedings.
Prime Minister. Humphrey. I was just wondering, did you have an interesting chat with Dr. Thorne?
Yes. He proposed the elimination of smoking.
By a campaign of mass hypnosis, perhaps?
By raising tobacco taxes sky high and simultaneously banning all advertising, including at point of sale. Don't you think his position is admirably moral?
Moral, perhaps, but extremely silly. No man in his right mind could possibly contemplate such a proposal.
I'm contemplating it.
Yes, of course, Prime Minister. Please, don't misunderstand me. It is quite right, of course, that you should contemplate all proposals that come from your government, but no sane man would ever support it.
I'm supporting it.
And quite right, too. You see, the only little problem is that the tax on tobacco is a major source of revenue for the government.
It's also a major source of death from killer diseases.
Yes, indeed, but no definite causative link has ever been proved, has it?
The statistics are unarguable.
You can prove anything with statistics.
Even the truth.
Yeah.
It says here, smoking-related diseases cost the NHS £165 million a year.
Yes, but we've been into that. It has been shown that if those extra 100,000 people had lived to a ripe old age, they would have cost us even more in pensions and social security than they did in medical treatment. So financially speaking, it's unquestionably better that they continue to die at about the present rate.
When cholera killed 30,000 people in 1833, we got the Public Health Act. When smog killed 2,500 people in 1952, we got the Clean Air Act. A commercial drug kills half a dozen people, and we get it withdrawn from sale. Cigarettes kill 100,000 people a year. And what do we get?
£4 billion a year. 25,000 jobs in the tobacco industry, a flourishing cigarette export business helping our balance of trade, 250,000 jobs related to tobacco, newsagents, packaging, transport.
These figures are just guesses.
No, they're government's they're facts.
I see. So your statistics are facts, and my facts are merely statistics.
Prime Minister, I'm on your side. I'm merely giving you some of the arguments that you will encounter.
Thank you, Humphrey. I'm so glad to know that we shall have support such as yours.
The Prime Minister, it will be pointed out that the tobacco companies are great sponsors of sport. Now, where would the BBC sports programmes be if cigarette companies couldn't sponsor the events that they take?
Humphrey, we're talking about 100,000 deaths a year.
Yes, but cigarette taxes pay for a third of the cost of the National Health Service. We're saving many more lives than we otherwise could because of those smokers who voluntarily lay down their lives for their friends. Smokers are national benefactors.
First of all, I'm very much thankful to Pakistan Institute of Development Economics for inviting me, especially the organizer and Dr. Nayab for inviting me at this important forum. And I would also like to congratulate the authors of two reports launched yesterday, one by SPDC and the other by the PIDE. These two reports are a great piece of scholarship and provide the very useful guideline for the policy. I'm not the expert on addictive behavior, but yesterday, once Nayab requested me to chair this session, I spent some time looking into the literature review, and I realized that Frank actually then had significant work on the subject and wrote many impressive papers. And I also realized that there is a sort of mixed evidence on the addictive behavior and the fiscal interventions. So the addiction science are intrinsically multidisciplinary, and economics is among one of the disciplines that offer useful perspective on the complex behavior surrounding the substance abuse. And I am pleased that we have in our panel today with the scholars from the diverse background, economists with us, two economists with us, the tobacco control, public health experts, and I am pleased to introduce the guest of honor today, Professor Frank Choloka, an expert in the field and author of many papers on the subject, and I'm sure he will help to moderate the discussion as well. So first of all, I would request Mr. Mahmood Khalid, Dr. Mahmood Khalid, he's an economist, and earlier I also realized that few of the paper on the communicable diseases, and he supervised some of the postgraduate student on non-communicable diseases. So first of all, we can start from you, and so over to you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So as the pace has been set by the session chair, and you are also aware that yesterday we had a very enlightening session about the economics of addiction. So this basically panel discussion is one step further in which we are going to talk about specifically tobacco taxation. And primarily the presentation which I'm going to deliver is based on the report which was launched yesterday. Although I'll not be able to cover each and every aspect which has been produced in the report, but just to generate the debate that what kind of messages were taken out from that report, this is what I'm going to share. So overall, I'm just going to briefly go over the basics of tobacco consumption related health hazards and what has been the tobacco taxation practices in Pakistan since I'm the first presenter, although it is going to be followed and further explained by the rest of the panelists. Then we are going to go deep into what we basically did in our study. And that was basically three key areas which we explored. One was the household level analysis. The second one was our field analysis which we did in terms of going through the tax administration. And the last one was basically the simulation model which we did. So I'm going to talk about that. And finally, the recommendations which we can propose for the legislators, for the journal audience which are going to work on these areas, we're going to talk about that. So let me begin by very briefly citing some of the issues which are making it very necessary for us to discuss about that issue as an economist, as a policymaker. So Pakistan has more than 22 million active tobacco consumers, and this is a study or a figure which was quoted based on about 5 years earlier data. So you can well think of that what would be the quantum of the tobacco users today. Additionally, about 100,000 premature deaths per year are also registered as stemming from tobacco consumption. To curb this menace, the country has also been a party to the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, FCTC, since early 2005. And this is not the beginning. Once we provide a list of what kind of legislative efforts have been done, it was dating before even 2005. So this is something which the government has recognized, but it has not done up to what it should have. The country made substantial efforts in tobacco control, but not necessarily according to the FCTC standards. For example, on specific smoke-free environments, total ban on tobacco advertisement, promotion and sponsorship, health warnings on the tobacco products, and tobacco taxation and prices. And there are parties which are working on these areas and trying to make the government to comply with these. So if we look back in terms of the tobacco taxation practices in Pakistan, the federal excise duty on the tobacco is something which was as a main instrument from the fiscal side. And this is one of the main revenue item as well when we talk about the overall national coffer or the revenue perspective. Historically, Pakistan had a very complex tier-based FED system for the tobacco, on which was applied both from the specific tax context and the ad valorem. And as a student of economics, you already know that what kind of differentiation is between them. One is levied on the quantity or the weight, and the second one refers to some percentage of a price. So if we compare our current state of the legislation on tobacco control with our neighboring South Asian countries, Pakistan appears to be lagging from them. And you are well aware that we try to benchmark ourselves with the league. So what we see from them is that, for example, a pack of Marlboro cigarettes costs around $5.91 in Sri Lanka. In India, it is about $3, but in Pakistan, it's only $1.21. And with the current devaluation, you can further think of lower value from that perspective. In Pakistan, certain measures taken by the FBR in recent years has resulted in de facto lowering the prices of the popular brands in the country. And this step have most far-reaching consequences in this regard, which was also the kind of debate of the third-tier system which we have all gone through. So we have basically provided a kind of a description of what had been the FED rates in the past years. So if you look back from June 2013, we had about a retail price of 45 rupees, we had a slab of more than 45.72 rupees or less than 45.72 rupees, and the taxes which were on more than 45.72 rupees were about 46.5, so it was almost 100% of that price, whereas on the brands which were less than 45.72, it was around 17.6. So this kind of legislation also creates a kind of a notch behavior in which we are providing room for the manufacturers to basically adjust their prices accordingly. Although the stated policy is that the FBR or the government doesn't set the price, but once these kinds of legislation is done in terms of providing the duty rates, they set their price accordingly. So that kind of influence is there. From June 2014 to June 2015, it was raised to about 54.12 in terms of the higher slab, and the lower one was less than 54.12 with the duty rate of 52.64, and the duty on the lower slab was around 21.7. So you can see from these structures is that most of these legislations were done through SROs, and these were based on somewhat work which was done by the FPR, but not necessarily based on a very good econometric model or with some understanding of how the data is flowing and what is the market picture. So I'll come to directly the last one, in which the third tier was applicable from September 2018 till date, that for the first year, for the third tier, for more than 90 rupees, the tax was 90. From 90 to 58.5, it was about 36.8. But for the last slab, for 58.5 or less, it was 25. So in effect, the FBR has lowered the slab for the first year so much so that the price of tobacco was bound to go down. And this is what was observed from the data also. And this is not the data which PIDE collected, it's the data from the Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, which is somewhat very reliable and nobody questions that. So you can see that once the third tier was announced in 2017, the prices of the brands fell instead of going up. So the manufacturers have basically taken advantage of this lowering of the tax rate in the first slab, and they have reduced their prices. So further going down, if once we moved into the field, we had good discussions with the FBR administration, and this is just kind of brief of what we observed from their field. There are more details in the report available. That despite stringent regulations, in practice the FED collection is still suboptimal. The FED on cigarettes is collected on fixed basis, that is per pack of 1,000 cigarettes following a specific tax regime. Interviews with the FBR officials brought up multiple justifications, all boiling down to the fact that despite its inherent inefficiencies, the tier-based sales tax FED is manageable given the existing administrative capacity of the FBR. So it's not the rate which is issue, it is the given administrative capacity of the FBR which is luring them to set a tax rate at a lower value rather than improving the administrative efficiency and the compliance rates, all in terms of the limited number of the personnel and other resources. We went to many field formations, and there we observed that the staff is somewhat overburdened. There is a sectoral kind of a formation in which one deputy collector is supposed to look after for the income tax from that sector, for the sales tax, for the federal excise duty, and even the compliance in terms of the audits and the investigation and other information. So that is somewhat burdening the FBR officials at the field as well. And they blame that they don't have the resources as well. But I believe that beyond these resource capacity, there is also a will in terms of the FBR officials to commit to the enforcement and others, because they're eyeing on just the revenue target and they're not thinking of other potential benefits of taxation in that context. So there exists an investigation and intelligence unit at the FBR which is mandated for the enforcement, but mainly they rely on the third party rather than having their own system of information. They seldom also use the data which is provided in the form of tax returns by these cigarette manufacturers as well. The Federal Board of Revenue has framed rules regulating to the registration, but often they are not that much implemented. So once I asked them that how many audits you have done, can you provide me some data on that? So they were unable to provide these kinds of data informations. So the enforcement revenue improvement through efficiency of collection is much neglected area of the reforms which are introduced so far. Field interviews suggested that the illicit tobacco sales in Pakistan are both policy induced and part of the unrecorded economy, which is mainly arising because of weak enforcement, not the taxation value. So after that, then we thought that in order to propose some good policy suggestions, we need to have some grounded data-based analysis. And for that, we look towards the possible data sources available, and the data which came to our perspective was basically the household income and consumption survey, the HICS, which is provided by the FBR, and that basically provided the basis for using a micro level data to conduct a study which estimated the price and income elasticities. And as a student of economics, you understand the concept of elasticity, but just to elaborate for those, if it is something new for them, that in order to gauge the responsiveness of a particular variable, we try to capture the elasticity parameter so that we would be able to forecast or predict something, that if there is a policy change, what is going to be the corresponding change in that particular variable. For example, if I increase the income tax rate, what is expected that how much additional resources would come in. So that's a kind of a framework which you try to understand through the elasticities. So we estimated the price and income elasticities, but not just the overall elasticities, because there is a need that we calculate some heterogeneous analysis as well, because often because of certain variables the elasticities may vary, and this was also pointed out in yesterday's discussion of the report launch, that what if the people can still afford the cigarettes, would still hiring up of the taxes lead to reduction in the consumption? So that basically conceived us that we should look into some heterogeneity, for example, the elasticity parameters based on the income or buying capacity of the people or the regions and possibility of substitution. So we calculated the heterogeneous analysis as well in terms of income, provinces and region. These estimates gave us insight on the impact, possible impact of tobacco taxation changes on different populations, and provide us the inputs for the simulation modeling of tax changes, which could be done for demand of cigarettes post-tax changes. In that study, we engaged all major stakeholders in the tobacco value chain to understand the tobacco taxation structure and administration and its impact on curbing the tobacco use in Pakistan. So this resulted in us providing this brief policy report referred to as the Economics of Tobacco Taxation and Consumption in Pakistan, authored by Dr. Durre Nayab as the lead, then Dr. Muhammad Nasir, Dr. Junaid Alim, me, Mahmood Khalid, and Anwar Hussain. So this was the team which basically conducted this study, and this research was funded by University of Illinois at Chicago, Institute of Health Research and Policy through its partnership with Bloomberg Philanthropies. So this was not just PIDE's effort, it was a collaborative effort from guidance and as well resources provided by our partners. Okay, so in that report, which we basically used on the highest level data, we first of all looked into the incidence or the description of how the tobacco consumption is being done in the country. So it came out that 45% of the households which were surveyed in Hicks reported consuming tobacco in some form. 45% of the households in Pakistan are using some kind of tobacco. And remember, this is the tobacco use which is based on reported for the main brands of tobacco, not the other brands which are emerging such as e-cigarettes or the beverages-based tobacco and other products which are not included in the questionnaire. Within that, there were about 26% which were using cigarette as tobacco consumption input, and 13% were consuming chewed tobacco as well. About 2 days ago, we had a workshop conducted by WHO here, and they talked about this smokeless tobacco, in which chewed tobacco is one of the main factors, and this is no less dangerous. Once the doctor was categorizing the possible carcinogenic effects or those which leads to cancers, so that turned out that that was no less harmful as compared to cigarettes. So that kind of understanding was needed in the research community and otherwise policy makers, that we have to profile basically that what type of consumption in terms of tobacco is being done. So 13% chewed tobacco was consumed, and whereas the overall budgetary allocation towards the tobacco consumption was about 3% of the total budget at the household level. So this is people consuming almost 3% of the resources on tobacco. And remember, this is just the tobacco consumption. The health-related cost which that household is bearing is not considered as the budgetary allocation towards tobacco consumption-related effects. So overall, if you look into somewhat details, we have also bifurcated it. And remember again, as I'm telling that this is provided in the report in more detail, that the prevalence rates are not different in rural versus the urban areas. For example, if you look at the cigarettes, the rural prevalence is about 27.81%, whereas in urban it's around 24.06%. So 1/4 of our households are using tobacco. And overall, if you look at any type of tobacco being consumed, rural is consuming more. Almost half of the population in the rural sector is using some kind of tobacco, whereas in urban center it's around 41%. If we go further in terms of looking at the prevalence across regions, so what we see is that the prevalence in terms of tobacco through cigarettes in KP is very less as compared to the other 3 provinces. Again, this is one reason that there the chewed tobacco is on the higher side as compared to the cigarette-based smoking. So what we found out that the chewed tobacco consumption in KP is almost 43%. 43% of the households in KP, according to HICS data, are using chewed tobacco. Whereas in any kind of chewed or smoke-based tobacco consumption, KP's 50% population is using it. Punjab had about 40%, Sindh 53% of the population, and Balochistan 66% of the population is using some kind of tobacco. So that's a health concern, public health concern, which one needs to take out from these messages. Now again, as the queries come in our minds, that is it only a factor related to the rich or the poor, so that dynamics helps us in terms of formulating a proper policy. We basically bifurcated these prevalences with reference to the income quintiles. So if you look at these quintiles, the pattern again changes. So it appears that the prevalence of chewed or cigarette-based tobacco has somewhat relation to the income, but not necessarily. For example, if you look at the KP-based consumption, there the chewed tobacco is even higher in the first quintile. The rich people are still using the tobacco from chewed sources rather than only the smoking perspectives. And this is the data which we have further used in our analysis in terms of the elasticity calculations as well. Now, there is a very detailed methodology available in the report that how we have calculated these elasticities. This is something which is internationally robust methods. And based on that, we have calculated the elasticities, and contrary to the conventional wisdom that the elasticities would be very low, it turned out that it's not actually low. So the people would respond to higher prices in tobacco, at least from the cigarettes, as compared to the conventional wisdom that it would be a very low impact value as compared to having a higher impact. So what we found out that the cigarettes elasticity was around -1. So in simple words, if you change the taxes or through prices by say 1%, there is going to be corresponding reduction in the consumption by 1%. So in monetary terms or in terms of the personal terms, it would be very high. So we can stop individuals from using cigarettes up to a greater extent if certain policies are made through taxes. If not 100%, still the people are going to reduce consumption. So it's not it's a false statement that the people are not going to respond to hiring of prices through taxation. For chewed tobacco, it's low, and the reasons again pertain to affordability, and to a certain extent the culture, and in somewhat practices the flavored context of that chewed tobacco is also one of the causes that the elasticity was turning out to be very low. We did the cross price elasticity as well, in which we saw that how the persons are going to switch to other products, and that is also prevalent to a certain extent, but not very significant in the first case, but in the second case it is significant that the people do switch to other possible consumption if the prices of the tobacco through cigarettes have been increased. We further went into some disaggregated analysis where we basically looked into the elasticities vis-a-vis the regions through provinces and the income groups. So what turned out to be that in terms of the rural and urban, the rural people are going to more respond to increase in prices through taxation as compared to the urban. So what we found out that the elasticity of cigarette through cigarette prices is even higher as compared to the overall national value, and it turned out to be -1.2. So if you increase the prices, there are going to be more than 100% reduction as compared to the prices of the tobacco through taxes. Once we went through across the provinces, the results were also expected that in KP, since the incidence of cigarette is less as compared to the chewed tobacco, there the elasticity was very low. whereas in the other regions such as Punjab and Sindh, the elasticity parameter was even higher. For the chewed tobacco, namely the KP province is very significantly responding to the price changes. So if we are able to do taxation not at just the final value addition, if we can bring it down to the processing of the tobacco as well, there would be significant gains. Across the income groups, we found that the lower income group is more responsive to price changes as compared to the higher income group, again because of the affordability context, but still that parameter is reflecting us that we can stop individuals from smoking in the lower part if there is a price change. So the people are going to respond to these changes. Then in the end, we used these elasticity parameters to do a small simulation analysis in which we have used different kinds of parameters. Unfortunately, they are not Pakistan specific since very less work has been done. So we used certain parameters which are internationally recognized and kind of standard values. And on the basis of that, we calculated different kinds of impact by adopting 3 possible regimes, in which we took the current regime which is being adopted, then talked about other possible regimes, in which one of the regime was to eliminate the third tier system and stick to 2-tier system. This is the third regime, and it gave us very good results in terms of identifying that if we adopt these higher tax values or reduce or eliminating the third tier regime would end up in having impact in terms of lesser people smoking as well as creating more revenue. Because for the tax authorities, this is an issue that if we are going to higher the taxes, the people are going to use lesser tobacco and they are not going to get enough revenue. This is absolutely wrong. If the revenue targets are to be met, even with higher taxes, but appropriate taxes, still higher revenue could be collected, even though we would have lesser persons using tobacco. More details are available in our report. So to end, we concluded that the FBR success is gauged through setting the revenue targets. They don't understand the value of the health cost which is associated with the tobacco related consumption. And FBR has exhibited severe capacity and resource constraints to establish an efficient monitoring, enforcement and compliance mechanism. It's not the rates, it's the monitoring, enforcement and compliance mechanism which needs to be looked into. And this result is in the tax administration to operate through sectoral field formations where a single mid-career official is responsible for all the tax dimensional results is a bad practice. The simulation exercises through the 3 projections with partial pass-through effects. Pass-through effect is basically where we assume that how much tax would result in terms of price higher. You as a student of economics know that 100% impact doesn't go through based on the elasticity values. So with a partial pass-through effect, projected scenarios to achieve improvement in the tax revenues and health outcome did matter. Projections in the 2-tiered system show significant improvement as compared to the 3-tier system, as I discussed. In the third projection, which effectively converts the 3 tiers into the 2 tiers, but with an increased rates, results in improving both the health outcomes without affecting the revenue by much value. So in the end, what we recommended was that there has to be some reforms in the tax enforcement and audit mechanism. An overarching framework for reforming the tax administration in Pakistan would be breaking the existing field formation on sectoral lines and reorganizing the FBR operations along the functional lines. These are the tax revenue collection, monitoring, audit and compliance. This will break the responsibility hubs, discourage discretions among field officials and introduce positive checks and reward systems that may result in reducing the leakages, improving the efficiencies and changing reward and punishment system. Tobacco taxation should be earmarked, and this is what the health minister also announced, although it went very wrong in the sense that it gave a bad message. But the tobacco taxation somewhat should be earmarked with the health costs which are related to it as well, keeping in the context of disease burden created by the tobacco consumption. Revenue generated from the tobacco product should be used to finance the health costs incurred by the health damages cost in turn by tobacco consumption. Any revenue generated is offset as it leads to a mounting health cost on account of tobacco consumption. So the FBR must be encouraged to focus on net revenues. This is against the current practice where the FBR remains satisfied with the current collection, which exceeds the previous year's collection. Further generating a discourse that the federal excise duty is not the same as the sales tax, because presently it is exercised as in the same mode in which the sales tax is being adopted, the VAT mode. With an overall improvement in the enforcement, the government would be in a better position to realize that FED on tobacco is not a VAT, and its primary purpose is to discourage tobacco consumption instead of generating revenues. To enhance the efficiency, technological solutions should be introduced for monitoring, enforcement, and compliance, and these could include e-tagging and tracking system. In the end, there has to be some political support for the FBR's actions as well. Because what we learned from our discussions is that the FBR is at times committed to do actions which are required. But since they don't have the political approvals at the higher end, or there are other holders that basically force them to reflect or resort to somewhat outcomes which generally are considered not good. So breaking the political back behind the tobacco industry and building a mechanism of social compliance where we include the value promotion that discourages the tax evasion, public demand for tax invoices, and refusal to purchase smuggled goods need to be encouraged through strategic leadership and effective communication. I'll share with you a small incident which one of the field formations informed us that the smugglers even go up to threatening their lives or the value of their property and others. So it's not just the police and law and order personnel whose lives are at stake when they're dealing with persons. Even the FBR officials, while doing their duty, are threatened so much that they often feel that it's a kind of a national cause for which they're working. It's not just working for the cause of working, rather it's a national cause. So we need to have this political support as well for whatever FBR policies are made and the requirements are made. Until these issues are addressed, the FBR's performance, like any other institution, would still be suboptimal. So why are we taking FBR to be different from the other institutions? And simplifying the tax structure. For example, ideally having a single tier structure should be in place, which should lower the administrative efforts required to implement, as well as give fewer incentives to the tobacco companies for tweaking the prices and increasing the overall tax rate. But it may entail a high probability of enhancing the illicit trade, thus affecting both the health and revenue outcomes. So aiming for such a system in the long run, effort should be made to reduce the illicit trade, and in short term, however, a two-tier tax structure with increased rate is recommended. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Khalid. So our next presenter is Dr. Mohammad Sabir. He is from SPDC Karachi, and he has done a lot of work on the household behaviors, and he worked with the household data. So over to, and I request my presenters to, if they finish the presentation in 20 minutes, so that we have more time for the discussion at the end of the.
So you have to inform the person when somebody is presenting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. So I will take care of it.
Don't worry, I will not take much time because Khalid Mahmood set the stage for me, and I'm very thankful to Khalid Mahmood because he covered many things which I'm aiming to cover in my presentations. Let me start with my own understanding when we went for the macroeconomic impacts of tobacco use in Pakistan. And we have very different understanding of the tobacco industry. We have a lot of myths in our head, and we thought the tobacco sector is very important. And we have one single fact in our heads, and that is Pakistan is one of the 10th largest producer of tobacco in the world. So we thought that we have a raw material, and that raw material can be translated or channeled through cigarette industry. So we have maybe a larger macroeconomic impact. But we are very thankful to the University of Illinois for not only for their financial support through their partnership with the Bloomberg philanthropist, but also their advices and food for thought, which tailored this analysis and which we help us to produce this report and bust out many myths about the tobacco industry and their macroeconomic impact in Pakistan. So Khalid Mehmood largely covers some of the facts about policy context. So high prevalence of tobacco already discussed, level of tobacco taxes is already discussed, complex structure of the FAD already discussed, and it's also discussed that there's a manipulated tax policy. So I'm leaving this and I'm moving from the next slide, which is what we did basically. So our story is we start looking the impact of these moving from 2-tier to 3-tier structure. And we are interested in whether FBR really gained some taxes, revenues, or they lost some revenues by moving or changing the structure. Second, we want to understand what are the interlinkages. So as an economist, we talk about forward linkages, backward linkages, and value added. So we want to understand all these linkages. Okay, what are the forward linkages, backward linkages, and what are the value added, and what are the contribution of this? And then as we are economists, we understand that there are multiplier effects. So if I said, if we say there's a decline in production, tobacco production, it doesn't mean it's only a stop at the tobacco industry. But through this forward and backward linkages and consumption multiplier, it also penetrates into other sectors. So we are interested to calculate or compute these impacts. So we have a relatively fuller picture. And finally, we did some simulation exercise to understand what will happen if there is a decline in the tobacco production, what the channels through which it passed through to other sectors, and how we can minimize or change this behavior or this negative impact, if it is any. So let's begin with some facts or statistics, whatever you call it, after looking this documentary. So 0.42%, despite this 10th largest producer, we have a crop area under half percentage point. And then agricultural employment is 0.03% of the total agricultural employment. And the area under cultivation is only 0.25%. So in a way, tobacco's in agriculture sector is not a big player. If we move from the tobacco agriculture to the manufacturing, the first surprise finding is that share of tobacco cigarette industry is only 1.17% of the large scale manufacturing. So remember, this is not the GDP, it's large scale manufacturing. It's only 1.17%. Industrial employment is even less than 1%. And share of federal indirect taxes is 3.8%. So it's only 3.8% of the taxes we are talking about. And as Khalid Mehmood said, and the Frank said yesterday, there's a negative relationship between per capita cigarette consumption and price index of the cigarettes. So if you increase the prices of cigarette, there is a responsiveness over the time. The consumption of the per capita consumption of the cigarette went down. So there is responsiveness. We are not saying it's rigid, inelastic behavior. And that's why it's make a strong case for higher cigarette taxes if we really want to reduce the prevalence in the Pakistan. So this is our message from this graph, a strong negative relationship between prices and consumption of cigarettes in Pakistan. It suggests that high tobacco taxes can play an instrumental role in curbing tobacco use in the country. And you are all aware of the health benefits and others. So it's also motivated us to go for the further analysis. Now, Khalid Mehmood already talked about the different tiers, and he also gave different tax rates. But if you look, what is happening? We talk in terms of effective tax rates. So we are considering the base, and we are talking about the tax rate. And it's went down from 40% to 20% in the low price cigarette. And not it's limited to the low price, it's effectively overall tax rate declined from 53.1% to 41.4%. And if you remember yesterday's presentation of Frank, he said WHO proposed 75%. So look, 53.1% on average, and it's also further went down to 41.1%. So we are almost half of the prescribed rate as per the WHO. And we also try to compute what is the revenue potential if government go for the higher taxes. And there is also discussion on the sin tax. So without complicating the debate, we said that if this excise tax is administered properly, there is a potential of 42.4 billion. And this is again consistent with the international findings. When you increase the tax, it's not only reduces the consumption, but it also increases the revenue as well. So now we are coming to the sectoral linkages. When we look at the tobacco industry, we found there's less forward linkages. So what it means, less forward linkages. Tobacco is not used as an input in producing other sectors' output. There's a very, very statistically insignificant role in the trade, but other than trade, there is no industry which rely on the tobacco for the manufacturing. And here, for the tobacco, I mean cigarette industry. And if you look at backward linkages, what inputs tobacco or cigarette industry use, so first thing I thought, because it's a tobacco, cigarette industries rely mainly on the agriculture. But to our extreme surprise, contribution of agriculture is only 5% of the total value of the cigarette, and it's not the value added of the cigarette. So agriculture is providing only 5% input in the cigarettes. No, please. And then if you look the other industries, which is also cover paper and other industries, which is 7.4%. And if you look the share of services, that is very high, 37.4%. So how tobacco contributing in the services sector? What input they are taking from? The first of all, they are relying a lot of imported inputs, including the filters. And they are also using financial services and other services. So that contribute in their production mechanism. And if you fairly look the distribution, which I talk about, backward linkages, value added and forward linkages, the 50% input they use and 50% output or value added they produce. So this is a sort of 50-50 relationship of the industry. Now, this is the complicated story. So we are coming to the multiplier. What will happen if we give the shock of 1 billion to the cigarette industry? So what it means by giving the shock of 1 billion, maybe you can say we are reducing the production of the cigarette industry by 1 billion. So what will be the direct, indirect, and consumption-induced effects of this on the macroeconomy? So let's first go with the initial effects. Let's say there's a decline of the tobacco of 1 billion. That's fine. But that tobacco industry is using 50% input from the other sectors. So which means this 1 billion decline is not limited to there. There is an effect of 0.5 billion on the other industries. So the 1 billion shock is basically 1.5 billion shock. And then again, there is an indirect effect, because those sectors who are using their input, so let's say if paper industry is relying on other inputs, if they cut their production by 0.5 billion, the other sector will also affect by this decline. So this is not limited only for the direct effect or indirect effect. So their impact is, indirect effect is 0.41 billion. So total type 1 is 1.91 billion. But we economists not stop here. We start looking for the multiplier in a different way as well. So let's say if we are pulling out some money from the economy, what it means, we are reducing the consumption. And if we are reducing the consumption, that effect is not limited to the cigarette industry or their inputs. It affects the other sector as well. So if there is a decline in consumption, maybe there is a decline in overall GDP to some extent. And this effect is, we all calling is consumption-induced effect, or in some cases we call it ripple effects. So if we giving 1 billion shock to the tobacco industry, it translates into 2.9 billion to the entire economy, including the all sort of multiplier effects. So 1 billion translated into 2.9 billion, including that 1 billion. Next. So what about the income multiplier effects? Again, the same calculation, same logic, and this come out very, very small. So initial effect, it generate 1 billion shock is 0.011, and then it's moved for 0.65, and indirect effect is 0.091, and tie 1 multiplier is 0.16, and consumption induced effect is 0.385. Next. But this is very important. And now we talk about the employment. One of the arguments generally raised that tobacco is not good for the economy because it's 1 billion shock is translated to 2.9 billion, but it's also providing the jobs to others. And if you are switching from tobacco, or if you are curtailing the production of the tobacco, you are basically reducing the employment in the country. So we are interested in how much employment will affect it if we reduce the 1 billion from the tobacco industries. So initial impact is only 45%. Only 45% will affect if we reduce the 1 billion production. And then again, if we go with the same logic, okay, how much employment will affect in other industries, so it translated to 27% in the direct, as a direct effect, 21% as an indirect effect, or if we also include the in consumption-induced effects, so it's a matter of 121%. So if we take out 1 billion from the production of the tobacco, it generates unemployment of 121% only. Next. So how we conclude these results? So our conclusion is this tobacco industry's impact on output, maybe call it medium, because it's 2.9. But in terms of income loss or in terms of employment, it is very, very low, and it doesn't have the significant impacts. This appetite us to go for the simulation of the results. So what will happen if we give a shock, a real shock of 10%? What will be the impact if we are not translating this to anything? And what would be the impact if we have a substitution effect? So let's say if people are saving some money, but by not consuming the tobacco, and as you see, the price sensitivity is high on the lower tier. And that's why this 3-tier system is not good, because it's lowering the price of the low tier cigarettes. So if you are giving the shock of only 10%, it translated into 16 billion reduction in consumption expenditure. And then consumption expenditure have declined by the 16%, and then this 16 billion consumption expenditure goes for the something else, let's say foods. So what will be the overall impact on the economy? So this is our simulation exercise. So look at here, 16 billion translated to 46 billion decline in the GDP. And this is type 2, so we are counting all the things, direct, indirect, and consumption-induced effects. And if this 46 billion saving used for consumption of other goods, it increased the output multiplier, output by 86 billion. So the net effect is positive 39 billion increase in the output. It is not the decline in the output, it's basically the increase in the output. And then if you look the income, there is a decline of 6 billion, but if you switch from the tobacco to the food items, it will increase to 15 billion, which means there is a 9 billion increase in the income as well. Why it is so? Because employment in the tobacco industry is less compared to the food industry. And that's why it's generated the higher employment effect as well. So there is a decline of 2,000 jobs in the tobacco industry, but it increases the 16 billion job in the economy, and the net effect is the 14 billion job increase in the economy. So if we follow this simulation exercise, next. So I'm on the time. So conclusion and policy recommendation, we don't have the very long list. What our analysis suggests that there is short-term losses because our simulation exercise depend on some assumptions and how this market forces adjust, what is the adjustment mechanism, and what is the switching mechanism and the preferences. So of course there are short-term losses which is relatively very small, but the reduction in cigarette production is likely to be beneficial for the economy in the medium to long term because agents switch, and depending the government mechanism, how they help it out, and what the good choices instead of cigarette they are using, it is beneficial for the Pakistan economy. And mind you, this not taking the reduction in the out-of-pocket health expenditure of the households. So that is not the scope of this study. We just focus on the macroeconomic shocks. And then our analysis suggests that three-tier structure led to substantial revenue loss. As Khalid Mahmood also suggests, as a practitioner of public finance, I know there's a beauty in simplicity. One-tier structure is the preferred structure because it's have less destruction. But anyway, if you FBR don't want to go immediately for that, maybe two-tier, but not this three tiers, because there's a just one thing. You increase 1 rupee price and then you end it up in the higher slab. So this creates a lot of distortion in the economy, and that distortion creates revenue losses. And this is our suggestion. You don't go for the 3-tier or 2-tier, have a uniform 1-tier FED structure and use FED as an effective source of reduction in tobacco in Pakistan industry. Thank you very much for your patience and listening to me.
Thank you very much, Sabir. So since yesterday's evening we are talking about the fiscal intervention, now it's time that we have to listen the comments from the FBR. So I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Zahir Qureshi, the Secretary, Federal Excise Duty and the Sales Tax. So over for your comment.
Thank you very much, the organizers, especially the interest shown by Dr. Nayab. I had a couple of interactions with her and our team. My friend Roberto is here. Some other renowned faces are here. So these are the times when we have been interacting for such a long time. And it's a matter of pleasure that at least this tobacco taxation is now discussed at so many forums. Earlier it used to be Tobacco Control Cell, then our oldest friends, the WHO, and then the Ministry of Finance and FBR. It's a very dry topic and a very sensitive and to some extent very complicated excise structures. Even when I visit my own field formations, my young colleagues, my assistant commissioners, deputy commissioners working in the field, and when I ask them that, do you understand that what is the taxation level in a packet of gold leaf? Mostly they are unable to explain. Even most of the people around here, they just look at the packet and then they can't determine that what is the level of excise taxation and what is the government share and what are the things, because it's a very complicated thing. It's not something which is easily or tangibly written. For example, with one example, I will try to have a sensitivity level of the excise taxation. Right now, the premium cigarette in Pakistan is being sold at 150 rupees. And out of 150 rupees, 110 is the share of the government. If a packet is sold at 150, 110 is the government share. So there is such a huge incidence of excise, although not meeting the requirements which are the desired levels, but even then the government is quite sensitive about it, that how much revenue is being generated. And especially in a country like us, where tax to GDP ratio is on the very high, lower level, and we are collecting around 4.5 trillion rupees, a sector which is generating 100 billion rupees in the revenues is really very important for all the policymakers and all the stakeholders in the country. For any financial policy, a net revenue of 100 billion rupees, and hopefully in this year it will be around 120 billion rupees. So it's very important to look at it and look at its intricacies and how to increase it. FPR is always in a very difficult position, very difficult position. We have to synthesize the extremes. How to collect the revenue, how to check the consumption, and how to regulate the market. It's a very sensitive job, and it's a very sensitive decision making as well. The current propositions which has been discussed now, at least we are happy that it is being discussed in the press. There are talk shows on it. There are standing committees in the parliament sitting on it. At least now, when there will be any legislative measure, our good segment of the parliamentarians are now sensitized about all these things. Earlier, they did not even used to understand what is these excise measures are and how is going to affect. At least now there is going to be a wonderful debate. And this is also one of the, I think, forum which are supposed to suggest the government that what kind of policy interventions should be made. The current scenario is not a story of only 1 year. It's not a story of only 2-3 years or a structure of 3 years and what went wrong and where things were right. Our friends from the WHO and the Tobacco Control Cell and certain other friends sitting here, they know it very well. In 12-13, we changed the structure. In financial year 2012-13, we changed the structure. And the structure which we switched over was in line with the recommendations of the FCTC, and it was also amongst the best global practices. We switched over from the ad valorem plus fixed to a specific level of taxation in the year 12-13. And then we also switched over from 3-tier structure to the 2-tier structure. This was a major policy shift back in 12-13. And kindly, I wish I could have my presentation with me, but I have to come from another meeting. In 12-13, the revenue was 76 billion. This is inclusive of excise as well as the VAT from the tobacco sector. And the volume, reported declared volume of the industry was 62 billion sticks. 62 billion sticks vis-a-vis 76 billion revenue. And then we started increasing the excise, and up till the year 2016-17, we consistently followed that structure of 2-tier. By increasing the excise duty every year through every budgetary intervention. And what happened in 2016-17? Why there was a 3rd tier? This is one of the most important things that which we need to look at and where we were wrong. In 2016, the volume was 29 billion sticks. This is unprecedented. You don't have any global study on it, that in 4 years, the number of sticks was reduced from 62 billion to 29 billion sticks in any other jurisdiction of the world. There is no comparison of it that an industry which was at the 62 billion sticks came down to 29 billion sticks. And the revenue, which was also 76 billion, up to year 2015-16, it went up to 111 billion. And the price of the packet in both the tiers, the premium cigarettes as well as the low cigarettes, both of them multiplied 3 times. The prices were up, the revenue was up, and the production was low. And this is, I think, precisely is the concept of the FCTC as well, that the production should come down, the prices should go up, and then the third stakeholder is the revenue, and the revenue should also go up. If there is a strategy which fixes all the 3 concerns, I think that is the best strategy. And it is something where from 62 billion, the industry came to 29 billion. And when it came to 29 billion, the revenue, which was earlier 111 billion, it came down to 73 billion. From 111 billion, we came down to 73 billion in 2016-2017. And then at this point of time, at this situation, it was not that we got or stuck at that position and where the Ministry of Finance got involved, everybody got involved, that why there is going to be a revenue loss, why there is a reduction of 35 to 40 billion rupees from a sector, and how we can afford it. Then there are the indigenous dynamics of the country, where we got stuck. It is something which needs to be understood. Our people can understand it, our politicians can understand it, our policymakers when sit here. We are governed by 4 constitutional jurisdictions even. We are having 1 constitutional jurisdiction in the area of FATA and FATA, another in the PATA, 1 constitutional jurisdiction in the mainland, and then there is another constitutional jurisdiction in the Azad Jammu and Kashmir, where my tax laws are not extended. And all these factors basically then contributed towards the market, and when the prices were so high, these inflows started coming in. And we have been questioned on it for so many times, even I think last day we were discussing it, that the industry, when they comes to us, they give us numbers which are assumed numbers, which are not original numbers. They scare us. They try to manipulate our policies. They try to give us numbers which favors them. They try to share the data which is in favor of them. And then they try to enhance the volume of the illicit trade. They say that illicit trade is, for example, at 49%. But our friend says that it is not like that, it is just 9%. We don't have any studies. The government does not have any studies. The Federal Board of Revenue does not have any studies. My Bureau of Statistics does not have any studies. Neither I wish that PIDE should conduct such a study. But I got one empirical evidence. One empirical evidence. When I go out of Marriott, just at the backside of the Marriott, close to PNCA, on a kiosk, I find a packet which is being sold at 25 rupees, while my duty and taxes impact is 28 rupees. When I go to the Melody, another small market close to my office, I find the same pack being sold there. I used to discuss all these things with all my friends sitting here. They are the regular visitors. Then I can't deny the industry. These manufacturers, which are basically local manufacturers, and they are now having one setup in my jurisdiction and another setup in the territorial jurisdiction of Azad Jammu and Kashmir, where I don't have any control. Neither my laws are extended there. Neither I exercise my jurisdiction there. And then the blame also comes on the FBR. Why we should not? Why we can't? FBR is having a force of 25,000 people. FBR is having 22 regional offices. Why they can't check it? Yes, we failed. We did fail in the enforcement. Because in my country, there are 700,000 outlets. Starting from Al Fateh, coming down to a kiosk, right behind this Marriott Hotel. I don't have that much inspectors. And this is not only my problem. This problem is there in one of the best revenue authorities of the world as well. You can find an illicit packet, non-duty paid packet, even in UK. You can find it even in small jurisdictions. There was a huge challenge in Poland. There was a debate in the French Parliament that tobacco products are coming from Belgium, where their rate was on the lower side. There are huge studies being conducted at the level of the EU that how to check the movement of the tobacco products because of the different territorial jurisdictions even within the EU. Now what is the solution then? If there is and I have been asking people for so many times that if I have to maintain a good level of taxation, I have to check the illicit trade. Otherwise, there will be a market switch, and that market switch is detrimental to everything. It is detrimental to health. All the health experts, nobody can say it that a cigarette which is non-duty paid is less hazardous to health as compared with a duty paid. It is equally harmful. But when we focus, actually, and we don't have any sympathy with any producer, but I got a soft corner for the person who pays me 100 billion rupees, frankly speaking. A person who is not paying me a single penny and he is taking a good share of my market, it's a legal trade. It's not an illegal trade. It's a legal trade. And the only way is that I have to increase the taxes. I have to increase the taxes. But I have to fix that segment as well, which is not paying any tax. And they are having an equal access to the market. It was a catch-22 position for us. And then we introduced that third tier, which is basically, for the name's sake, it's only third tier. Otherwise, it is just two tier with a reduced rate. Because there are no, it's a very small, meager amount of production in the tier 2, and a very meager amount of revenue is coming from the tier 2. Basically, it is right now, originally, in reality, it is two tier with a reduced rate at the tier 3, which has now been even going back to the same level where we were in 2016-2017. In 2016-2017, the tier 2 rate was 1,320 rupees per 1,000 cigarettes. And we are close to that now. Even at this point of time in tier 3, the excise duty is 1,250 rupees per 1,000 cigarettes. And we are trying to increase it again to that level where it is a 1,320 from where we started down. So we are trying to fix the issues. We are trying to introduce the digital solutions as well. And even during this last exercise, we have introduced and we have tried to fix the green leaf threshing units. We have introduced the e-invoicing systems. But when I look back, we think that we should take the numbers and we should consider the realities, the practical realities as they exist today. And as it used to exist at certain points of time, and then there should be an holistic approach. We should be helped by the economists by considering the indigenous environment of my industry, my economy, and my consumer behaviors. Where the people, it's difficult to earn even 500 rupees for a very large segment of population here. A differential of 50 rupees in a pack of cigarette, it makes a lot of difference for a smoker. And especially a smoker who is from a working class, who is earning 400, 500 rupees per day. And if he gets something at the rate of 75, and on the same pattern he gets something at the rate of 25, his preference will definitely be there. And now it's such a huge business that people who are coming up with it, they are also grown to such an extent they are too powerful. Huge revenues, billions of rupees are involved in it for FPR, and billions of rupees are involved for the illicit trade handlers as well. So we expect that these interventions, they will help us, and these policy decisions and the discussions, they will help us to formulate a policy where every stakeholder comes on the one page. It's a very long discussion, but just to present the bare facts, I think I just tried to clarify the position with a few bare facts. Otherwise, it's a very long discussion. We held so many extensive sessions at Geneva with the Secretariat, then belatedly at Bale, even in Pakistan, so many sessions, and the debate should go on. And it helps us to formulate the better policies. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zahir Qureshi, for explaining the issues faced by the FPR. So our next speaker is Dr. Ziauddin. He is Director, Tobacco Control Cell. So, sir, over to you.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you very much, organizer of this workshop, inviting Tobacco Control Cell. I'm personally thankful to BI Philanthropy, University of Illinois, especially, and these two organizations. Actually, thank you, Mariam, thank you, Frank. You people really make TCC Day. I'm very happy today. Since last decade, for last 4 or 5 years, we made a working group for the tobacco taxation in Tobacco Control Cell, where Mr. Zahir is one of the members. We were always discussing that whatever the recommendation, whatever the proposal we gave to FBR, it was his comment that you don't have documented evidence, local evidence from Pakistan market that we go for your recommendation. Up to certain extent, FBR might be right in their views. But as far as Ministry of Health is concerned, basically we are concerned with the health of the citizen, and this is the prime responsibility of government of Pakistan to take care of the health of the citizen of the Pakistan, including my ministry. I think having these two studies with regards to local data, probably we can have a good discussion with FBR and other fellow to convince FBR that situation is not that severe what the tobacco industry portrays with regards to availability of illicit product in the market. I do believe, yes, we have the burden of illicit trade in the Pakistani market, but it is not that severe. That is the overblown picture the tobacco industry portrays to FBR and the Ministry of Finance. As he himself says, at the government level, at the FBR level, we don't have any concrete data with regards to illicit trade. I'm not authorized to declare the data, but I can confidently say Recently, with the support of the union, one civil society organization in Islamabad, with the technical guidance from Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, has conducted the market share of illicit products of cigarettes in the Islamabad. Out of 1200 sample, Mr. Zahir, probably you would be surprised to know that the availability of illicit trade is not that what is even written in the Euromonitor, what is written in the previous researches. Probably by next month, this organization is going to declare its report, but I'm sure it's almost 50% lower what the tobacco industry says, and just scared the government, don't go for the higher taxes. In the Ministry of Health and in Tobacco Control Cell, we believe, you always say that when the third tier was not formed, even that in the presence of second tier, the revenue falls down, and significant loss to the government. And industry is asking, and even in the discussion in the Senate, in the committees, discussing why there was a fall in the revenue of tobacco taxes. It's very surprising. How come industry is producing 69 billion in 1 year and abruptly its production fell down by 29 billion? I don't believe, because we don't have any monitoring mechanism to monitor the production of the cigarettes. It's the tobacco industry who say this is the production, and FBR can buy their argument. We at the Ministry of Health, we are not agree to buy their argument. I must say that was the stage the tobacco industry developed to go for the second tier. It was not in the mind of the FBR definitely, but it was in the minds of the tobacco industry to make a drama like this, to give the picture of 29 billion, and then they get the result of the third tier, and everybody is now discussing why the third tier was developed and what was the result of the third tier. Probably it will come, it will unearth definitely. There is some investigation is going on in the Auditor General of Pakistan has already gave his history. NAB is doing their investigation. Who will be responsible definitely will be unveiled. I hope those who involved in making the drama and making the loss of billions of rupees to exchequer of Pakistan will pay what they do it. Thank you very much again, the organizer, to invite me on behalf of the Tobacco Control Cell, and we'll always looking for the future support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zia Saab. Our next speaker is Dr. Roberto, Technical Officer at the Prevention of Non-Communicable Diseases from WHO Geneva. So over to sir.
Well, good morning. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'm going to speak on behalf of the WHO. In fact, I prepared a presentation, but let me make some considerations first. First of all, we in WHO help the countries, assist the countries on dealing with tobacco taxation. We have a long relationship with FBR here in Pakistan. I started working in Pakistan this year. And we are committed to discuss with FBR and all the stakeholders and all the partners about the challenges we face when we have to increase tobacco taxation. So I think that the words of Mr. Qureshi are very opportune, because he is describing the challenges that FER has, and the perceived challenges given the set of information that they have, given the structures and conditions that they are working. And we respect that, we understand that, and we start working from that situation. So we, the first things that we do when we go to the countries is to listen. And this is the most important thing to increase taxes, to listen tax authorities. Because it's true, and I will explain, that the industry has an active role in the arguments, as we discussed yesterday. The perception of the authorities are conditioned by the information that they have, but the structure of the tax administration that they have. And I think that we have to start from that point and move forward to overcome the barriers and challenges that the tax authorities and the country have in order to increase taxes. Can you, how do you hear? Okay. So, from our point of view, given the set of information and the set of conditions of tax administration, many of the arguments put in the discussions are overemphasized, are misled by the tobacco industry. So for us, increasing taxes above customary levels to effectively reduce consumption is mainly a discussion to overcome tobacco industry interference. And because we observe that despite all the knowledge about the harmful impacts of tobacco use, the net benefits of higher than customary tobacco taxes are discussed. We know that tobacco is harmful, that taxation is good, and it's not only taxation, it's a complete tobacco control program, a complete awareness about the tobacco harmful impacts, but the discussion exists because there are restrictions and limitations here on the information available for tax authorities and authorities in general, and there is the industry interference overemphasizing the challenges and questioning the net benefits of tobacco taxation. So for us, the first thing is to listen. How the industry is applying in the country its arguments. And we believe that we have to listen to the arguments, we have to know the situation, and putting all these things together, we work to overcome the challenges, discussing and working, cooperating, proposing, suggesting solutions to the tax authorities. I discussed the other day two main ways to interfere in taxation policy from the industry. One is I call the direct strategy, which is the direct strategy to go and to establish close link with governments and try to convince directly and to offer solutions and recommendations. And for me, I saw this in many countries, this is a type of interference which is mainly result of the importance as taxpayers of the tobacco industry. You know, although in the whole revenue, the tobacco industry could be very small, normally they are between the 10s or 20s main taxpayers in a country, where a country has a high prevalence, of course, a high market. So the industry goes to the tax authorities and try to use its leverage, which is the fact that it's important taxpayer. So this is the traditional method, and there is an indirect strategy, which is also combined with the direct strategy, with the direct intervention, but is result of something that Mr. Qureshi has mentioned. This has become a public discussion. Why? Because tobacco is harmful for health. Tobacco is not only a main taxpayer. Tobacco is killing people, is harmful, and for this reason, the discussion now has to be public. We have to discuss, all us, we have to discuss. We are not revenue people. WHO is not a revenue people, but is a health people. And because tobacco has a health impact, the discussion of tobacco taxation should be public. In order to stop and to block and to barrier the public discussion, the industry used the indirect strategy, which is mainly to scare us, to scare the public, and to scare basically tax authorities. And we call this the scare argument, which is a combination of the arguments, and Frank called this the myth or the false dilemmas. But in fact, the industry is using these things, and the acronym, we use the acronym because SCARE is the main purpose, is to threat the authorities, and the S of SCARE is related to the threat of smuggling and illicit trade. C is related to the threat of court and legal change, because you are being unfair with the industry. We are good taxpayers, and you are challenging us, so we are going to challenge you. The A is related to the anti-poor rhetoric, the R is related to revenue reduction, and E is related to the employment, production, the job impact, and the more general economic impact. And I think that the industry can use this argument, first of all, because they have a lot of information. This position makes its argument more credible, or apparently more credible, and is related to the lack of capacity of the tax authorities, because sometimes the tax authorities are more interested in other taxes, in other problems. They have a lot of problems. So tobacco taxation is in the middle of the priorities of the tax authorities. So for this reason, WHO, UIC, and all the partners working on tobacco taxation we are working in order to compensate and to build capacity and build information and analysis to counter-argue the industry argument. In order of for the sake of the time, I will go to this point. So, just summarizing the situation in Pakistan, the industry is an important taxpayer, although sometimes decided to regulate the tax payment, and there is an important sector of the industry that decided not to pay tax, because in Pakistan there is a main problem of tax evasion, and I agree with Mr. Qureshi. The point is that there are problems to collect the legal duties. There is a revolving door between the high-level officials in former high-level positions in governance going to the tobacco companies. The tobacco companies have a strong support in parliament, and they are not ashamed to defend the tobacco industry as in other countries, because there is not enough awareness and discussion about the public effects of tobacco in the country. So nobody in other countries with a longer tradition of tobacco control will raise their hands and say, no, the industry is important. No, they know that despite the employment, this is an industry that is killing and producing diseases, okay? So it's a shame to defend this. This is industry that should be regulated, that should have high taxes, and should be restricted the use of and the consumption of tobacco products. And also, they are seen as important foreign direct investors. And I'm not against FDI. I think that I like the movement of attraction of FDI in the country, because it will be important for the development. But the tobacco industry is something that should not be encouraged. If they want to come, okay, but they are not special. Specials are food industry, infrastructure, these other things. This is a killing industry. It's something different. Okay, after 2016, the industry has contributed to create an argument based on smuggling and revenue losses. And I agree with Mr. Qureshi that the situation exists, but the solutions should be different. The solutions could be different, and we have to discuss. The point is that the industry is saying that taxes are ineffective to reduce consumption, increases prices over some number like 50 rupees will increase immediately illicit trade. We don't know. It's necessary to create a cheap segment with low taxation to fight illicit trade and increase revenue. And tax increases did not reduce consumption, only increase the illicit market. So these are, for us, the dilemmas that we have to discuss. And the illicit trade has an important role. But we think that the industry is overemphasizing, first of all, overemphasizing the size of the illicit trade. Secondly, is overemphasizing the mechanisms from price increase, consumer reaction, going directly to the illicit market. This is not the case. Consumers reduce consumption, quit, and some of them could be to the illicit market, could go to the illicit market. As I said yesterday, we have the problem of illicit trade in the country, because it's mainly tax evasion, and we have to solve the problem of tax evasion. And if the problem of tax evasion is related to constitutional things, to special regions, we have to face that. We have to discuss that. Not to reduce taxes. We can wait. If you want, we can have two segments of the industry, one with lower prices, but we need to discuss. We can have this temporary, but we have to discuss the problems, and the problems are the lack of coordination, institutional coordination between the different regions in the country, and we have to face that problem. Is there a problem of corruption in the country? We have to face the problem of corruption, as I said yesterday. So we have these problems producing illicit trade. We have to fix. The correct policy is to fix the problems, because even with, and we know that even with lower taxes, you can have illicit trade and tax evasion because you have other problems, and you have not the capacity to do all the things, and you cannot control this. Well, okay, let's discuss how we are going to control these problems. Finally, I would like to finish with my comment yesterday. And I think that we have to fix the tax compliance problems, the tax enforcement problem that the country has, and we are willing to work together with FER on those things. And yesterday I suggest two things. One is the implementation of the illicit trade protocol. In its third part is mainly about tax administration, good practices of tax administration, and in the other parts are other measures to deal with illicit trade that other parts of the government should also implement. But that is one thing. And the other thing is there are many international partners working on tax administration and custom administration, the World Bank, the IMF, even the organization for OECD, the OECD. So we need to seek the cooperation of these other international organizations in order to analyze the problems and to suggest solutions and recommendations. Our point of view is we recognize the problems, but we have to have the correct policy for the problems. So there was and we are here in the development discussion. There was Tim Bergen many years ago said that for each objective you have to have a policy instrument. So to fight the illicit trade, you have to improve the problem of tax administration. You have to improve I'm finishing. You have to improve the legal and constitutional problems that your country has, and you have to maintain the tax policy to reduce the harmful use of tobacco in your society. And with this I finish, and thank you for the presentations, very important presentations, and I'm sure that will enrich the discussion. And thank you, Mr. Qureshi, also for your presentation, and thank you, Doctor, for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Roberto. So, Frank, would you like to give any comment before we open the floor for discussion?
I think I will hold my comments. People heard a lot from me last night. But I think this has been a very interesting session. I think some very good presentations and discussion. It stimulated a lot of interest. We have many, many questions, but we only have a few minutes left in the session, so we're not going to be able to answer all the questions. But I think during the tea break, people will have an opportunity to speak with the speakers and the commentators. So maybe just a couple of questions. On the PIDE report, people were interested in knowing more about the methodology and whether or not there was any ability to look at things like substitution. I think not just within tobacco products, but there was also a question about substitution to cannabis and if that was something that could be looked at in the future.
On the methodology portion, we have our colleague, Dr. Nasir, if he can just come up here and briefly explain.
Okay, so the methodology that we used was actually the Deaton model. So what you have in the household survey, what they report, it's not the price of the cigarette or the tobacco products, it's just the total quantity and the total expenditure. So if you divide the quantity by the expenditure by the quantity, you get the unit price. Now, but the unit price doesn't reflect only the market price. It also has the quality. So the simple unit price doesn't actually capture the market price. So what you do is you use the Deaton model, which also captures the quality. So it's a very detailed methodology that is reported in our report. But if you have any specific questions, I can answer that on that. Substitutions within the product. So what they report here is the on different brands, but not within the products. So there was no substitution between the chewed tobacco and the cigarettes. Thank you.
Thank you. We also had some questions about the SPDC report. So the interest was in asking about whether or not you were looking at short-run effects versus long-run effects, and also some of the questions about how you decided to model substitution to healthier options instead of substitution to other products, for example.
Thank you very much for having these kind of good questions, and I really like to appreciate it. Basically, as I said, there is a difference of the prices occur after third tier in the lower tier. And in the lower tier, a substantial part of the budget is allocated on the food items. And this cigarette consumption is taking away the food expenditure from the household to the tobacco. So what we did, we are assuming, that's assumption, if there is no expenditure on the tobacco, we are assuming that there is a likely switching towards the food item. So from where initially these expenditure came out, because there is a lot more on the lower tier side, the poverty side. So that's why I feel if there is a switching toward the food item, and this is again assumption, we are going for another comprehensive study where we are using relatively more sophisticated results by using computable general equilibrium model to further go one step ahead of that. But for this exercise particularly, we assume, because there's a lot of came from the lower tier, and there's a possibility of switching back towards the food items, and that's why we have that kind of analysis.
Oh, so building on your reply, so I was just wondering that whether your study helps to differentiate between the two different type of people. Maybe one group of people, those who are more rational, they understand what are the disadvantages or what the toll they are going to pay on their health, and even a minor intervention, whether it's the fiscal or otherwise, they react on it. But the other group of people, those who are more myopic, or maybe, so how do you differentiate between these two group of people? Your elasticities, whether they are journal or?
So basically, yesterday I more clearly understand the difference between the monetary prices versus full prices, and thanks goes to the Frank. So for our study, we are not going for the full prices, and we are not going into the debate that the people are rational or myopic. We are talking about the average impacts. But as I said, we are assuming, because there's a lot of people from the lower cadre, that's why we are assuming the switching between the from the tobacco to the food item. And we didn't go for this full price impact, because full price impact requires a lot of other investigation which is beyond the scope of this study.
As Dr. Saab have rightly pointed out, there still needs to be done a lot. We don't know actually that at the household level what's the composition of the smokers. As in the yesterday's lecture, Professor also identified that it depends that what kind of smokers are we facing with. There would be persons like, for example, who have just started smoking, which would respond to tax increases or the monetary price increase. And there would be persons who would like to switch in the initial phases and then switch to maybe other parts of consumption. But still, a lot of research needs to be done. And hopefully in coming time, we will be doing that.
Thanks. We have several questions for our colleagues from government. So a lot of interest, I think, in trying to understand the balance between the health objectives of taxation and the revenue objective taxations, how FBR balances that, if the Ministry of Planning has ideas about this, and trying to understand who influences tax policy. How important is the Ministry of Health or the Tobacco Control Cell? You know, what could be the role of the Ministry of Planning? So I think a lot of interest about how these decisions are made and what the balance is between the different objectives.
Actually, I think that the Tobacco Control Cell and FPR, they were working together. And then we got our own objectives. Health people, they got our own objectives. Revenue people, they got our own their constraints. And whenever we go back to the Secretariat even, from Secretariat to Ministry of Health, there is always a divergent opinions about it. Revenue people, they always think that we have to enhance the revenue. We have to enhance the revenue. And then there is a health concern. And I think that wherever there are success stories, that those two objectives should synthesize. That if we are earning revenue and then we are paying for the cost of the health, we don't get in the nut. At the nutshell, we don't get anything. When we are earning from the one hand and we are spending on the other side, and especially when we are spending on that segment of the society which don't have access to the, at the private levels, they don't have access to the private hospitals, they are basically burden on the public health. So these policies need to be synthesized, and especially when now I'm seeing that the academia is involved, and they are coming up with so many analyses, because when I look at these reports, we can't develop such reports, because it is basically the subject of the economists and the academia. They should come up with the solutions. Otherwise, the divergent opinions of Ministry of Health, and then there's a finance, and I wish that there should be a debate in the cabinet where Minister of Health should come up with the data supported by the economists and the studies, where the Minister of Finance should not be able to respond. And he should follow the recommendations which the Minister of Health is given.
From the Planning Ministry's perspective, we are right now in process of preparing the 12th five-year plan, and the non-communicable diseases is one of the very, very important priority agenda. And definitely these two reports are going to help us to define a strategy, and his comments regarding that we need a multidisciplinary sort of policy for this, to control the tobacco control. So few of the audience, few people wanted to ask questions. So what do you think, Frank? If you go toward, or you want?
I think from the audience.
Okay.
Let me ask one more question to Roberto,
okay.
and then we can open up for more discussion.
Okay.
But I agree with Roberto that I think the key thing here is really strengthening tax administration to help deal with the illicit trade problems. So one of the questions was, is there a magic solution? Have we seen countries that have done this effectively? And what sort of things have they done to really deal with illicit trade?
Well, I will say that there is not magic solution. And I will say that you have to understand more the problems, and sometimes it's a combination of things. So you have to identify the different elements acting to increase the illicit trade. But I think that in terms of tax evasion, there are good principles, and I think that we are going to support FER, and I think that all of us, all the partners, and all those working on tobacco taxation are willing to support FER to improve the tax administration and to see the problems and suggest solutions. So I will say that as one important part is related to tax administration, I think that there are simple, not simple, but there are best practices, and some of them are written in the protocol. So I think that following and implementing the protocol will be a good next step for Pakistan. Thank you.
All right, so I saw many hands in the audience. So there's obviously a lot of interest in this. We're going into your tea break, but as long as people here are willing to take a few questions, why don't we start on this side, and then we'll go, oh, he's got the microphone. All right.
This is Mehtab. I work for the news. My question is, as you know, the high stakes are involved in this whole sector. I am amazed that why the FBR is devising policies without having any research, and I know there is a fiscal and research department within the FBR, and when they don't have any research that what is the size of the illicit trade, so how they are formulating the policies, and at a time when I think some parliamentarians are also involved in this business of illicit trade. So it's very important that FBR should have some kind of research and some kind of data to formulate the policies. And I think the problem is that there's a need to curb the illicit trade. Another side, there is also need to increase the taxes. Otherwise, it's chicken and egg debate, and there is no solution.
I don't know if you have a response.
Yes, of course. I think I must appreciate that every second day I found some story in some newspaper about the tobacco taxation. And this is the concern which the civil society is having. And this is the, basically we should not take it as a pressure. This is basically assistance to the FPR. That people are sensitizing the people at all the levels. In one of the newspapers on the national dailies, every day you will find a story now. And it is good that now the people are being sensitized, and now we are compelled to go for certain studies, and we should engage the academia, and we should do the research, so that at the time of the policy formulation, at the time of the decision making, there should be empirical data available to the FBR and to the policy maker and even to my cabinet when they take the decisions on the tobacco taxation. And it definitely helps us, and there are certain sensitive issues which I must appreciate that the press is coming up with, and it is going to have a positive effect on the policy making.
And just to build on that, I think part of what we're trying to do is to help develop the sort of evidence that FBR needs to make some of these decisions. And the work that we've been doing with PIDE and SPDC is going to continue over the next 2 years, and we'll address some of the issues that were raised, trying to understand better the costs to the healthcare system and to the government's outlays as a result of tobacco, trying to understand some of the issues around illicit trade, and trying to understand the broader macroeconomic impacts better. So this is work that will be ongoing. The evidence will continue to develop, and hopefully that will help inform policy. So I think we have time for one more question. I saw a hand on this side. Go ahead. 2 questions.
Yeah, as you just informed that there are plenty of questions which are unaddressed, and we are working on these. So for this study, we could not unfortunately do a customized kind of a survey. So we actually don't have the data in terms of the actual prevalence within the households, that but there are other studies which are available, the Global Adult Tobacco Survey and the other one which basically profiles the smoking age as well. But for this study, we did not use that data.
And
Yeah.
I don't
So
know
we
if
should-
anybody has any
Yeah,
comments
but
on the
if you on the
CSR?
corporate social responsibility.
I think
So
that,
right now, only one comment that at Planning Commission we are actually right now in process of formulating of a corporate social responsibility framework in Pakistan, which do not exist right now, and definitely this is the part of it. Yeah.
All right, so I think that's all the time that we have for now. Obviously, there's a lot of interest. This is a good discussion, and people are welcome to carry on with questions during the tea break.
Thank you so much, everyone, for showing up today, and thank you so much for the panelists to be here on the floor. So it's a time now to present the shield as a token of appreciation. So now I request Asma Heather to present the shield to Dr. Roberto. So yeah, so she will present a shield to you, so please. Now I request Dr. Muhammad Sabir. And now I request Dr. Ziauddin. And now I request Dr. Mahmoud Khalid. And now I request Dr. Zahir Qureshi. And now I request Professor Frank. And now I request Professor Frank to present the shield to Asma Heather. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much.